Hi, everyone. It's so great to have you today. I'm super excited to be live with a dear friend, as well as somebody I just really, really admire. We have Noora Raj Brown here from Goop. I'm going to talk about her quick bio. We already have a number of amazing questions that you guys have submitted that we're gonna walk through with her. But I also just wanted to do a quick reminder that we have the 10th house, which is our private membership community. Our applications for that close tomorrow. So April 14th is the last day. I think it's like midnight EST for you to get your applications in. And that's going to be for our spring cohort. And just a quick reminder of what it is a community of other founders. We group you by stage, industry, geography. You have a directory of stage, industry, geography. So you'll get to know all these other founders really well. There's a platform for you to ask all of your burning questions, to share your pain points, to help workshop through specific issues you're having with your business. And then we also have a number of resources and, of course, programming and education that we're offering all the time. And then in-person events. We have in-person events happening 6 to 8 times per month in different markets. Almost all the major markets have them. So check out what's happening in your city. You should be able to see that on our social. But anyways, would love for you to join. So don't forget to do that by tomorrow. But without further ado, I'm going to go through Noora's amazing bio. She is the EVP brand at Goop. She oversees brand marketing, corporate positioning, executive communications, talent outreach, social media, influencer marketing, and press strategy for the Goop brand and all its initiatives. She also works with the team to conceptualize new content verticals, collaborations, and product lines and live events. So the brilliant things that you've seen come from Goop over the years, that is largely coming from Noora's massive brain. She's also the founding board member of political engagement organization I'm a Voter, and is on the executive committee of the Hammer Collective. And she serves as board of Proxima and is an advisor to multiple startups, including Motherly and Jemmy via General Catalyst. So I'm going to dive in because, again, we have a lot of questions for you from our community that I want to share. I'm going to start with Beth Nidick, who asked about hearing your story. What was your journey to actually getting into this role at Goop?
Sure. Well, first of all, hi guys. I wish I could see all of you, but I will settle for, as I said, seeing Allie's beautiful face. But sorry, let me recenter my camera. Okay, how did I? So I had a very sort of linear but not linear, I think, career trajectory until I got to Goop. So I was a writing major in college. I really desperately wanted to be a journalist. And that was sort of I was pretty laser focused on that. And I moved to New York at 21 with this like big dream of that I was going to be a writer and, wanted to work at all the places we want to work when we were 21. So, the New
You'd
York.
watch Sex in the City and
I mean that, but I think I also I had these like really lofty goals. Like I
yeah.
thought that I was going to be writing like cover stories for the New Yorker by 25. I was not the most realistic in my career aspirations, but so I came and started working in editorial, and I loved it. I loved the storytelling aspect of it. My first job was at a magazine called Details, which no longer exists, and this sort of will tell you about the framework for my early career, which is that I've worked with a lot of magazines that no longer exist. But so after years and years in editorial, I started to think about what was next. I mean, I think the writing was on the wall at that point in terms of where editorial was going, and that there had to be a different model. And as part of that, so my last job I worked at InStyle, and InStyle's big claim to fame was that they really drove the reader to purchase. So you would look at these like beautiful spreads, they really distill down fashion trends for you, and then you would basically be sending somebody to an advertiser site or to an affiliate link or whatever it was. And you would drive the reader to we had all these great stats. It was like the average reader bought 8 things from every magazine. But as you can imagine, in a world where advertising dollars are incredibly tepid and fraught and hard to find at that point with Instagram and digital and all those things coming up, it was a really fragmented business model. And it sort of drove me nuts that you were spending all of your time kind of capturing this reader, and then you were just sending them off site or sending them, you're not creating a journey for them. And when I first came to Goop, one of the main things that they were trying to do, which again at this point doesn't feel so revolutionary, and Allie knows because she was there at the crux of all this, but was create this contextual commerce universe, right? Where you could provide service to the reader, but you could also provide a pathway to shop and you don't lose them. And that was sort of, I was still in magazine, still trying to figure out what was next. And I found this really fascinating way, I thought, of combining those two things at Goop, which was like the storytelling that I craved so much for my earlier sort of aspirations of wanting to be a writer, but also this really practical application for it, which is that you're giving somebody service in the context of products.
Right, right. I mean, I didn't even realize how long you were at InStyle, by the way. And that was also part of my career journey. And I do remember that you were very easily able to drive people to product, but it was something that was interesting from a Goop perspective. It was very sort of revolutionary, this
Mhm.
idea of actually being able to shop from the content, of the opposite of everything that you learn being in a media organization, and that's church and state between edit as well as the publishing side. So I love that. And then Shannon Jones asks, what does Goop look for in brand partnerships and how do you track success?
Sure. So, I mean, we do two different types of brand partnerships here, right? We do one side that's under strategic partnerships, which is more of an advertising led partnership. And those are evaluated a little bit differently than the partnerships that sort of live in the collaborations and brand side of the business, which is more what I'm closer to. On the brand side, I mean, it's really about looking at what strengths each of the brands has and how we're sort of how we're lending those to each other, right? So that can be a new audience, that could be reinforcing a brand tenant that we already have, that can be providing a service that we don't actually offer. So, like for example, we did a collaboration with EcoAlf, which is this very cool, sustainable small company. And we are making a lot of strides towards sustainability, but we are not 100% sustainable in every aspect of our business. And we were really inspired by what they were doing and loved the idea of bringing and supporting that tenant as we sort of scale up to be able to be closer to that. We did a collaboration with Universal Standard, which I also thought was a very, very cool one, where we were able to offer 24 different sizes inspired by the G label aesthetic. And that was something that, for them, they got to touch our audience, which was really important to them. And for us, we got to provide an offering that we couldn't normally do without completely upheaving our business model and our production and our supply chain and our factories. And so I think it's really about like, what are you tapping into that you can't do on your own? Because especially for a brand like Goop, there is so much that we can do on our own, which is great. But I also think the partnerships and the collaborations, and we've been doing them since the brand started. I think the first one was Valentina or Stella McCartney. I can't remember exactly which one, but and come to this stage where we're like working with everyone from a CB2 to Amelia Wickstead. So it runs the gamut, but in each case, you're getting something very specific and clear from the partner.
So I have a question that actually relates back to this. And this is from Robin Taylor. And she asked, if you're a small business, right?
Yeah.
And you don't perhaps bring a big audience to the table, or you don't perhaps bring a big social following or necessarily even brand awareness to the table. How should those brands think about pitching themselves to brands like Goop or brands that like InStyle or some of the bigger organizations that might not necessarily be thinking top of their mind about them?
Yeah, sure. So look, I don't think it's always about brand awareness and audience. Of course, that plays into it sometimes, but I think it can also be about, like with EcoWealth, like that was about a product, right?
Yeah.
Like that was, I think if you have an incredible innovative product, if you have a brand that stands for something that again, like we want to touch, that's also why a lot of people come to Goop, because they feel like there's an authenticity to the brand. And sometimes, if you're a very big brand, for example, it's hard to have that. It's hard to have that like real connection. So I think when you're looking at a smaller brand, like you might not have 100,000 followers even, but you might have an incredibly engaged audience that really trusts you, and you might
Yeah.
have this wonderful community that will actually drive more conversion. I know we're going to talk about this later, but I think like I look at influencers in the same way, and there's like a reason why why micro and nano influencers are so powerful, because like those are like those brands that you feel like you really understand, you really know them. Those are usually the ones that actually have more sway over their consumer.
Right. Right.
So I
It's
think
true.
just looking at, yeah, like what are the data points? Like what are the data points you're most proud of with your business? And I wouldn't like be talking about EBITDA, and I would be talking about like follower growth if you're a small brand. I would look at sort of the other things, like whether that's click-through rate or, engagement or things like that, that you can really paint that picture.
And as a follow on to that, Noora, is there like, how did they think about even getting in touch with the right people at those brands, whether it's like Goop or somewhere else? Do you have any
Yeah.
recommendations for that? Because that was a question that came up within the 10th house community. And I was trying to figure out how to best answer that because it's a tough one.
Yeah, I mean, it is a tough one because I think like we all know that it's a personal reference, right? That really gets you in the door or connection. I mean, I would say that, and I'm sure 10th house is a great example of that, but like the more sort of networking groups that you're in, the more like founder communities. I mean, I would assume like you guys have a place where you can kind of go and be like, does anyone have a contact here? And
Yeah.
like, or does anyone have a friendly here? I mean, I think that helps a lot. Um, a lot of it, honestly, like I wish there was an easy answer, but I think a lot of it really is persistence, not in a creepy way. I'd be very like, there's definitely a line, but I also think that there is so many times that um people really do not do their homework, and they say, oh, I like think this brand is so cool, I want to be a part of it, but they're not actually looking at the assortment.
Yeah.
And it's shocking to me. Like I'll have calls with people sometimes and they're like, oh, I didn't actually know that you did that. And I'm like, well, you guys are pitching me. Like, did you go on the site? Like there's sort of like that disconnect sometimes. And it takes, the thing that's frustrating about it is it takes a long time. So like earlier in my career, I used to work in PR. And that was something that was always tough for me, was that you would spend, to like really do a great pitch, you would have to spend hours researching the reporter, right? And like, what do they write about, and what have they written about before, and what are they interested in? What did they tweet last week, and how do I get their attention? But those were always the ones where you actually broke through. And I will also say, I think people, even at big brands, like, yeah, we're all inundated, but I think people actually really want to help. So like
Mm.
when you see something that is really thought out, like I will always press forward, like I will always like, if someone cold emails me a resume, like I always send that to HR. And I think that like you might not even realize like if you're sending these cold emails that they might be getting into the right hands. But I think you have to do it enough that that you have like a good chance, right? Because for every person who's going to like press forward, you're going to have 10 people who just delete it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great advice. And it's true. It's like it finds its way to where it needs to be, but it might take a little bit longer. Madeline Darcy asked about leveraging celebrity. How can
Yeah.
you best leverage a celebrity founder, and what are the edges of that celebrity's personal brand and the company's brand? Like, how do you, I mean, I remember this from Goop. Like, how do you separate them? Where does one end and one begin?
I mean, how much time do we have? And I'm sorry, I just want to apologize if my voice sounds like this because I'm sick, and I'm sorry. But
Yes,
I um so it's really complicated. And as someone who's worked sort of in celebrity or adjacent to celebrity for pretty much my whole career, I don't think that there's ever a perfect answer. What I will say, and it also really depends on like the comfortability of the celebrity and what they want to do. A couple things I would think about. One, I would make sure that you're really looking at the strengths, like the authentic strengths of the celebrity founder. So if it's somebody, for example, who's like not great at social, which like we know right now, it feels like every founder, celebrity or not, also has become a social media influencer and like also have that big platform. And I think that's a lot of pressure. But if it's someone, for example, is not great with social, and like, I'll like Gwyneth this is not her comfort zone, being on social and like, she doesn't like videotaping herself walking down the street or buying a muffin like that. She's not good at that, right? Like she doesn't feel comfortable doing it. I don't either. I get it.
Yeah.
But so when we work with her on things on social media, we really try to think about like, where am I going to let her shine the most, right? Like she's really good in an interview setting. She's really good bouncing ideas off of someone. She's good when she can like have a little bit of fun with whoever's asking her the questions. Like what are those? Oh, everything okay?
Sorry. Yeah,
No,
let
it's
me
okay.
just turn on my do not disturb. Apologies.
So I think
Keep
it's
going.
like look at the celebrity and like have a real honest conversation with yourself or and with them, depending on what your relationship is with them, about like where it makes sense to use them. I mean, I remember one time I pitched someone. She will remain nameless because it would shock you guys, but I asked someone to be on our podcast. Someone who is like probably one of the most eloquent people in the world, according like in my perspective, actually probably most people's perspective. And her team wrote back and said she's not good on podcasts. And I was like, wow, like this is shocking to me because I would think that she's good everywhere. She's so eloquent, she's so smart. But I thought that was a really apt way of like the reason I think that is probably because her team doesn't let her do podcasts. And like
Yeah.
they really stick to the places, the formats, the experiences where she's comfortable. The other thing I would say with a celebrity founder, we struggle with this still, is like if you are building a business that requires an exit and you're really trying to scale it, it cannot fully be reliant on the founder or on the celebrity or on the talent, right? Like it really has to have a community of its own, has to have a brand of its own. People have to understand what the brand is without that talent. So I think you can use the talent to build, but only to a certain point. At some point, you really have to pull back and be really strategic and sporadic about how you use them.
It's so true. And that was one of the biggest things that we focused on, like from day one, because otherwise it's impossible to scale, as you mentioned. I'm going to go back to talking about as a small business owner, and specifically your brand expertise, Noora. Tara Bonia or Bagna, I'm sorry, Tara, if I'm not pronouncing that correctly. She asked, as a small business, sometimes it feels really overwhelming and I feel pulled in all different directions. With limited bandwidth, what are the biggest areas you suggest focusing on specifically related to branding and building awareness?
I mean, I would say two things. One, I mean, this is pretty high touch and it depends, like a lot of times you're not going to reach that many people, but I would say experiential, whether that's like doing a little pop-up in someone else's retail store or an event that you can partner with other brands on. You don't have to take it all on yourself if you don't have that bandwidth, but I think experiential really works. I think it just, it's funny. I can't remember whether we were talking about this during my session or I was talking about it with somebody else at afterwards, but like if you look at a lot of the traditional like D2C darlings, like a lot of them go back to the tactics that worked for everyone for years, right? Like with retail being a great example. People want to like feel something, right? Like they want to like walk into a store and feel inspired and they're asking you to like make them want to shop, right? And I think in some ways it's just easier to communicate your brand tenets when you're able to do something experiential. And again, it does not have to be big, right? Like it can be lo-fi. It can really be like if your value prop is content, for example, like let's say you're a mental wellness startup but you do like incredible content, like you can do a live podcast, get 20 people in the room, you can do like these like kind of small high touch things. But I think that's one. Obviously that tends to be a smaller footprint, but it creates, I think, more evangelists. Social, as usual, like I would put most of my effort into it. I think you can do a lot with like even new platforms that are out there, like a Lemonade.
Yeah.
I mean, who knows what's going to happen with TikTok in the future of that right now? But like, look, you can do like team up with your other small founders who are like-minded, right? You can do collab posts, you can do lives and cross-promote audiences. As long as you're creating really great content and really serviceable content, the nice thing with the algorithm is like it does push it forward. And I think with the way that paid's working great for some brands, it's not working great for others. So I think with the costs of that, sometimes it just makes more sense to like really double down on your organic acquisition.
And I like that you mentioned experiential and some of these like old school tactics that feel a little bit like from our time.
Yeah,
But
totally.
play it like the one-to-one we've even found with FFC, and we don't have a physical product, but the one-to-one is what works. And I think people want to feel that connection. And Peter Thiel even writes in his book about the power of having somebody be 1,000 times more invested in your
Yeah.
brand and have 1,000 times more love for your product. And so that is a great foundation, especially when you're small. So love that feedback. Um, Carolyn Clark asks about how you differentiate your brand in a saturated marketplace.
So I think there's a couple of different ways. I mean, number one, I think it's really important as you're building the brand and from an inception to know to one, be laser focused on your value proposition, not get distracted with other things, other verticals, other ideas. And look, like we have been guilty of this, right? Like it's so easy to say, like Goop is a lifestyle brand. It's so easy to be like, let's go into this. Like, doesn't this seem fun?
Yeah.
And it is, but I think just like really articulating, like take time to do real brand work, articulate exactly what your value proposition is. You know, like what are there's like those 5 things like community, promise, collection. Like I'll put it on the chat, but like really I would take time to figure out each of your missions in those elements and then go back to it consistently. Like really hit yourself over the head with it. And then because the tighter you can be as an organization, and it starts with the founder, the tighter your messaging will be as it flows through the entire, like all of your different channels, right? And I think it's really important to like, for example, at Goop, you know, we say we're an indispensable resource and we help women make choices that are additive, powerful, and expanding. And so everything we do goes back to that lens, and that gives us a lot of leeway, right? Like we can do a lot of things in that sentence, but everything has to go back to like really giving, like allowing someone to step into their power as a woman, as a consumer, as a, you know, as a wife, as a like mother, all of those things.
And Yvonne Georgie actually asked a question that sort of piggybacks on this, and that's about dilution, right? So those are your filters, right?
Yeah.
Creating your mission, your values. This is what these all need to map back to. But is there a matrix or a process you use to prevent dilution of your brand and ensure that you have the most effective ROI?
Yeah, I mean, so at other brands too, but like especially at Goop, I mean, we're so tight around it when it comes to every partner that we work with, whether that's on the advertising side or not. I mean, when you have a wellness product, for example, that is on Goop, like there is a whole portal process where we have to look at all of these different ingredients and third-party results and all of this stuff. And it doesn't matter whether you're an advertiser or not, you still have to go through that process.
Yeah.
But I think what we really learned was that all of that work that you do up front, it is like the foundation for keeping the brand tight, right? So like all of that time that our product development and research team spends looking at those third party products, like the reason that's so important is because when a consumer goes and actually buys a product, like we know it's efficacious. We know that it fits our standards. We know we're not going to get like an influx of customer service emails because of it. We know we're not going to get a PR storm because like something, you know, I don't know, is now being outlawed or whatever it is, recalled. So a lot of that brand work is really like, it's not just on the brand team, right? Like it's not just on sort of whoever your chief brand officer is, maybe that's you. I think it's on every single part of the organization to uphold that.
Right. So the
And
product
sorry, what?
so the product side and whatnot too.
Yeah, and I think what you asked a question about ROI. I
Yeah.
mean, look, I think for us, I would say the biggest ROI we had was we did a show on Netflix, and like that's not. I get that's not always like achievable for every brand, but I do think the idea of like bringing what your value proposition is, exactly what we talked about before, what's really tight about your brand to an entirely new platform. But upholding your brand values and being really tight about that is an incredible way to scale and get ROI.
And then we have a question from Christina on how you actually measure and track the Goop brand. So as you've added new categories and verticals, how do you look at brand performance, and what are sort of some of the success metrics or benchmarks that you guys uphold for yourselves and are looking
Yeah,
at?
I mean, we look at so many different things. I mean, if this is like about sort of just like brand overall, I mean, we do a lot of brand surveys. We look at feedback, which is a little bit more high touch, but we literally read every single feedback email. We have social listening tools, so we can understand what the conversation is. And sometimes it's a good conversation and we want to be part of it. Sometimes it's not a good conversation and we kind of decide how we want to play into it, if at all. Um, we're looking at everything from like click through and conversion to social following. And I mean, there's so many different measures, right? Like there's so many different ways that we can pull in all these data points and say, and like, look, when we look at all these data points, if every single one is down, then we know we have a brand issue. If
Right.
some are up and some are down, and we're like, okay, paid is really tough right now. But we just did a brand survey, and the feedback we're getting from the brand survey is that people really understand, what the messages we're trying to put out into the world, but like this other channel here isn't working. Like we kind of triage all of it. I don't think there's a specific formula, but I think that there is a data point you can pull from pretty much every channel or every activity that will give you, it's a mirror, right, to the health of your brand always.
And then I think that's really helpful, because it is true that it totally depends on the goal in terms of what success metrics you're looking at. And I think probably for every campaign or every initiative, you're looking at something a little bit different, other than just the general brand, as you were talking about, and looking across all those metrics. We do have a question about influencer marketing from Emily
Yes.
Thomas. In terms of what is the best way to approach influencer marketing to increase brand awareness? And do you have tips for choosing or pitching or managing influencers?
Yeah, so we just launched a new ambassador program probably like a month ago. And I can tell you from an influencer standpoint, it's the best thing we've ever done. It
Are
just
those macro,
allows,
micro?
I'm sorry?
Are those macro or micro? Like,
It's a mix. It's a mix, but I would say more on like the 500K below, and like really concentrated in that like 10 to 100. Um,
yeah.
we talked a little bit before about sort of like what are your, like when you're pitching a brand partnership, like how to pitch it properly. Like for example, we just did a like really cute little Instagram story with this influencer. Her handle's still in Tribeca. She's really cute. And that was like one of the best, like the performance from it was incredible. She doesn't have a ton of followers, but like her aesthetic was like right on brand for us. The content was really great. Like sometimes it is just that simple, and so what we really look for is like, again, it's not about the follower count. Like we have people who have bigger followings, but that's not honestly what we look at. Like we look at engagement, we look at content, and then we also just test it out, because the thing that we've noticed, which is really wild, and part of having this ambassador program has given us this granular data. We use a platform called Split, which like literally lets us look at every single influencer and what each one is driving, which is a game changer for us because we didn't really have that before. It's funny, the people who really convert, right? And like other people are great in other ways because they might be more of a brand awareness metric. But the people, until you really test it and you really have the data behind it, it's really shocking who actually, like, where people are converting and whose audience actually takes action on what, And I don't know that there's, like, I think we have a hunch, because like I'll look at someone and be like, I feel like your content's really on brand for us. But I think it can be really random. So it's like
Do
you
you
really
guys
do have to test it out.
do you identify internally at Goop with a team, or are you using like an outside agency? How did you identify them?
Yeah, we do it internally. So a lot of what we do is we'll look at, people who are already talking about the brand, right? Like people already have an affinity to it. I talked about experiential. I think events are great when you're creating these influencer relationships. Because people like one start to understand your brand, they have an affinity to it, and also like it's kind of old school in the way that we have a lot of relationships with people who have come from places of like real mutual beneficial work, where like they're like, I really like this is what's super important to me. And we'll say, okay, well, we really want to tap into your fashion audience and like want you to style this piece. And they're like, well, I have a book out. Like, it's like this constant conversation.
Yeah.
I think you have to have that kind of like high touch mentality with it. Doesn't have to be with everyone. You can have a much bigger affiliate network. But with the people who are really driving for your brand, which you'll see, then that's where you get like deep into it with them.
Love it. And then somebody also asked about it was Kirsten Schmidtke asked how you break into other geographical markets, like if you have any tips there. And then I'm going to ask you one or two more questions if you have time, Noora, and then we'll wrap up.
Yeah. Man, that went so quickly. I feel like we're just at dinner, Allie.
I know, right?
Wait, sorry, what was the first one? Now I totally forgot it.
So
Geographical.
you asked about tips for breaking into new geographical markets.
Yeah. So one thing that we have done a lot is so we now have 5 retail stores. We used to do a ton of pop-ups, and we did that bit specifically to test out the market. Now pop-ups are expensive and they can take a lot of work to build out in a big team. So you don't always need to do like a full pop-up. Like I said, you could, one thing that we have been doing and we do a lot with other brands is people come to us and say like, we don't have a retail presence in Brentwood, for example, but we really want to do a trunk show and we want to bring in our customer and like, will you guys work with us on it? And so if it's a brand that we sell, like we will usually do a really fun, great partnership trunk show and there's a rev share and so it's like good for both brands. But it's really low, like it's a real, like it's not a lot of money, right? And it's a really like lo-fi way of doing it. It's like you're literally just bringing product into a store. But I think that's a great way to test out these different markets and to dip your toe in and to find like those like-minded customers is either pop up at someone's store or like, do that kind of old school trunk show model. It helps when you find a host, especially like a local one. So we do that a lot. I mean, when you go back to influencers, like if you are saying, I really want to be in Charleston and I think I have a market there. I mean, get really targeted with your influencer outreach, look at audiences and how many, and I would say it's really important if you have an influencer platform to look at their audience because they'll show you exactly where the markets are, right? Because you might have somebody who like lives in Charleston, but all of her followers are in Los Angeles or like vice versa. Right. So, I mean, I would make sure that you're really looking at like, do they have my target audience? I mean, it's funny. I have a friend who, again, will remain nameless, but she's a very pretty girl and used to be an actress and she has a ridiculous amount of followers, but she always jokes because she's like, they're all guys. Like, nobody will ever buy a t-shirt from me because like I don't have any women following me. It's like all like guys from when I used to like, be a model back in the day.
Amazing.
And so that's like a good example of somebody that you wouldn't want to work with, right? If you have a female centric brand that you're trying to push.
Yeah. And you wouldn't necessarily think about that, but that's smart though. And tells us a lesson of definitely look at their followers. 2 more questions, if that's okay. Yeah. One is from Ronit. She asked so Goop has made wellness obviously super sexy and really cool. She's wondering if you have any tips on how to do that within the fertility space specifically.
I mean, I think that fertility is cool and sexy. So I don't know, like maybe I'm the wrong person to answer this, but like I think there's nothing more beautiful and like amazing than seeing a gorgeous pregnant woman. Like, I mean, I still think of like that Demi Moore cover on Vanity Fair, right? Like there is like nothing for someone who's been pregnant, like there's nothing more incredible than like feeling that myself. And I went through IVF and I went through a lot of fertility issues. And I still remember like I had 1 round of IVF. I did it on Valentine's Day. And I like remember looking at my husband being like, this is the most romantic thing we've ever done. Like I think it's I don't know. I think I feel like fertility is such like a cool, incredible, like powerful space, you know? I don't know. To me, like it is a really sexy space.
I mean, and like the female anatomy is so sexy. And like
Totally.
what Goop has done with the beautiful flower sculptures and like the cheekiness of it too, that I think where you can take that is in a lot of different places. But I agree. I think it's I mean, it's all about sex, right? Like you have to procreate in order to
Yeah.
ultimately have.
But it's also about like, I think that femininity that you feel when like you're trying, when you are
Yeah.
pregnant or even like if you don't carry yourself and then you have a child and you look at the child, like I think there's this incredibly like powerful femininity. And like to your point, if you look at like visual references for it, like there's so many incredible artists that like have based their whole careers on that, right? Like look at Robert Mapplethorpe and the flowers and sort of like the lighting and things like that. Like I feel like it's such a it does not need to be like this like dry science space. Like I think it's like one of the most beautiful spaces there is.
I totally agree and love that answer. And then this is actually a good one to end on. Christina Giri, I hope I pronounced that right, asked about one of the biggest lessons you learned in your career and any trends that you're seeing right now coming up for fall and winter.
Yeah. Biggest lesson. I mean, you guys all know this, so I'm probably late to the game, but I for so long was like only interested in things that I was interested in, right? Like I was always really interested in the creative side and less interested in sort of the tech side or the product side or the accounting side. And I think the best thing, like the advice I did not take that I was given was to learn all of the other sides of the business that you're not interested in. Now, that being said, you guys are all founders, so you don't have that luxury. You had to learn it already. But I do think like, the more you can kind of get into the nitty gritty of stuff that doesn't come naturally to you, the better you will be equipped to make decisions for the business as a whole. Um, and I think it's really easy sometimes to kind of like be like, okay, I'm going to outsource this or I'm going to pass this off. But the more, I think the more you have like a deep understanding of every single facet of the business, the better you are at whatever your core strength is. Again, you guys probably, when you're running your own business, you kind of like, you have to know all of it. But I think that was the biggest learning for me. Because I put it off for a really long time, and then I had to figure it out like in the last like 8 years, pretty much, of like how full operational business works, and like what decisions am I making? What are the implications of that in ways that I didn't even think about before? And your second question, trends. Okay, well, I was actually listening to this a friend of mine's a trend forecaster and was gave an incredible talk to us the other day. And one thing she was talking about that I thought was really fascinating was this idea, and you're seeing it in fashion already, right? But like this idea of security and comfort and trust being like the real tenets that people are looking to for brands right now. Given all the uncertainty of, the last God knows how many years, but we've been through a lot, and it's and I think people are really looking for, that word authenticity again is a bit overused, but I think people are really looking for brands that have that real connection and also have that comfort and that trust. I think it's less about brands that are sort of being innovative just for innovation's sake. And when I said you see that in fashion, like you kind of see there's like this whole like shift towards no logos and like this sort of like soft, like oatmeal colored clothing. And, like there's like, it's really interesting she's so fascinating. But it's really interesting to kind of like think about how these little mind shifts that are really all based on current events that are affecting all of us are what change consumer behavior and what change the way that we're spending our money. And so I think that's important, is that if you like, I wouldn't make big changes right now, right? Like if you can be and internally you can, but externally you want to be consistent with your messaging and you want to like really show security to your consumer.
Love that. And I think those are almost all of our questions, all
Great.
really good questions. And Nora, I feel like that was like a master class in brand marketing and building businesses. But I loved that you ended on the idea of knowing multiple parts of your company. Um, oh, I am going to ask you one more because I just got another ping in our chat here. But what I do think that's interesting about that is a lot of founders don't know a lot about finance.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
or if you don't come from that, there's a tendency to want to pass it off. And so I think that that really applies well there, because in order to make the right decisions for your business, you really do have to have a good handle of that. Um,
I mean, I
but
don't come from it either. It is not my comfort zone. Sometimes I'm like
right,
looking at
right.
Excel spreadsheets and I'm like, what? Like, how did I get here?
And you don't have to be the expert is the other thing, is just
Not at all.
having a comfort, like having some degree of comfort with how it works and the numbers and whatnot. And then also as a manager, as you start to scale a team, I loved how you said it helps you make good decisions. If you don't know what goes into a process for somebody or how hard or how long something takes, then it's really impossible and not fair to be the one making the decision on their behalf. Um, so final question is from Michelle R. She said, "What has been the best cold pitch that you've ever received?"
Oh, Michelle, that's such a good question.
I love that.
Okay, let me think of the best one. You've really stumped me. I'm trying to think of the best one. I mean, I've gotten a lot of really good ones. I mean, I think,
Or one that stands out, maybe.
you know what? There's a girl actually who I hired to lead our influencer team. And she's one who started that ambassador program that I was just telling you guys about. And she wrote me just like, it was so simple, but it was so thoughtful. I could tell that she had spent like hours researching. She brought up all these like obscure things that I was like, oh my God, like you read that interview? Like no one read that interview. But she really understood the brand. She obviously like knew a lot about me in a way that was like, again, not like, it wasn't like weird or creepy. It was very like, you could tell she was just
Thoughtful.
truly interested. And I found out after, yeah, it was really thoughtful. And I ended up hiring her. She wrote me like a full cold email. I think she had submitted her resume and it hadn't like somehow made it to me. And I don't really know why. But I like sent it to HR and I was like, I want to talk to this girl. And I found out later that one of her closest family friends is Gwyneth's best friend. And she specifically did not go to her because she was like, I just want to get this job on my own. And like, I was so impressed by that and was so like, I was like, wow. And by the way, like, I actually don't agree with that. Like, I think if you have an in, you should use it. But I was really impressed with the fact that like she stood out so much on her own without that, you know?
Yeah. Oh, well, maybe she knew that she could do that and she wanted to also prove it to herself. So I love that. But yeah, the research I think goes such a long way, and personalizing things. And the same thing for when you're talking to investors or trying to get into a retailer, or again, trying to work with partners. Doing your research ahead of time, I think, just goes such a long way on behalf of doing the work for them that they're otherwise going to have to do,
Yeah.
or just showing that you care.
I mean, for example, like I know we don't have a lot of time left, but I think someone asked a question about sort of, how do you pitch buyers? Like if you go into someone's store, for example, and you see that there is, I don't know, maybe that there's like a specific, maybe they're a clean beauty brand, but they don't have clean retinol, right? Like there's like, if you understand the assortment, you could figure out what their holes are. And then if you pull in the right numbers where you're saying, okay, like I'm making this up, but clean retinol is a, X amount of revenue opportunity. It makes it really hard for people to say no to you if
Yeah.
you've done your research.
Yeah, totally agree. And Divya Mathur, who was on, had mentioned the same thing, just doing your research and showing that you've studied and you know where the opportunity is. And then basically doing the work and helping drive business on behalf of the retailer that you're going into. Well, everyone, Noora is amazing, and you all are amazing with all of the super poignant questions that you sent in. So we're so grateful again for you taking the time with us, and Noora, for you taking the time to answer all of these things and share the wisdom that has been hard won. But again, one last plug for our community. If you all are thinking about it, 10th House memberships our applications close tomorrow, and then we have our amazing orientation that happens next week, and we'll get you all rolling. But thanks again for being here, and thank you, Noora. And you all have an amazing weekend. I know it's one more day, but feels like it's been a long week already.
It really has. But thank you guys. I appreciate it. This was so fun.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.